be asking yourself.
Question number 10, the Honourable Trevor Mallard.
Mr Speaker, my question is to the Prime Minister, further to his answers to oral question number 1 yesterday on the purchase of state assets by foreigners. What percentage of Contact shares are currently held by foreigners or corporations?
The Honourable Bill English on behalf of the Prime Minister.
Mr Speaker, on behalf of the Prime Minister, I stand by my answers to questions, but I'm not responsible for the Contact Energy share register.
Point of order, Mr Speaker.
Point of order, the Honourable Trevor Mallard.
Mr Speaker, yesterday there were some very specific questions where the Prime Minister said he did not know. Mr Speaker, this question was allowed if it was into an area that was not answerable by the Prime Minister. You would have ruled it out.
I think the member makes a fair point. The question would not have been accepted had it not been seen to be in order, and it is capable of answer, and I think the House does deserve an answer. The Honourable Bill English.
Well, point of order, Mr Speaker. I did answer the question. I stood by the answers to the questions asked yesterday, and I'm not responsible for the Contact Energy share register. That's an answer to the question.
Well, order. I clearly remember the questions relating to the proportion of shares held by various groupings of people, and this question has been accepted as being in order. The meaning of the question is very clear. It is a question that is perfectly capable of answer. It shouldn't be any big deal. It's not a matter that is a huge state secret, I would have thought. If it's not possible to obtain the information, that would be totally acceptable, but I'd be surprised because the information should be reasonably readily available. And while I accept that the Minister could argue that he's not responsible for the state register, this question, though, relates to answers to oral question number 1 yesterday, where these matters were canvassed by the Prime Minister. And I happen to be on my feet. And it is a very simple thing. If the facts of a matter are not to be divulged, we've got a serious problem. This is a very simple question. It doesn't imply anything. The question just asks, in relation to the answers yesterday, what percentage of Contact shares are held by foreigners or corporations? Now, it may not be possible to give exact figures on that, because I'm not sure the register would break things down into foreigners or corporations, but some guidance to this House, to a question asked in this House on notice for a couple of hours, should be possible. Point of order, the Honourable Dr Nick Smith.
Mr Speaker, if you are going to say that if a minister makes any comment on any issue, that then he's responsible for questions that go well outside his mandate, and surely it's not within the responsibility of any minister of this House or the Prime Minister for the share register of a private company, then you are going to get the habit of ministers simply taking a very narrow perspective of questions and refusing to answer anything. Otherwise, you're going to have ministers responsible for every single little bit of New Zealand society.
Well, I don't think I need further help on this. The Speaker would probably be fairly grateful if ministers took a fairly narrow view of some questions asked. It would be a step forward in many occasions. I mean, this is not some passing comment made by a minister. This was a central issue in a question for oral answer yesterday. Now, and it's been accepted as being in order. And it's a primary question. It's not as if it's a supplementary question, and it's not as if I wouldn't have thought it's a huge issue. That it ought to be a matter of being possible to get this from the public record, what proportion of these shares are held, and so making a big deal out of it is in no one's particular interest, I would have thought.
Point of order.
Point of order. I'll hear the Honourable
Mr Speaker, it does appear that your ruling has come as somewhat of a surprise to the Minister, and while we have started on the question, I would be happy to seek leave to have it deferred until tomorrow so that he can get himself briefed.
Leave is sought to have this question deferred. Is there any objection to that course of action? Oh, there is objection. Order, there is objection. I therefore invite the Minister to please answer the question. The Honourable Bill English.
Mr Speaker, it is not possible to establish with accuracy whether New Zealanders or corporations or foreigners own the shares in Contact Energy. For instance, T Custodians Limited, who would that be? Custodial Services Limited, who would that be? ASB Nominees Limited, who would that be? Custodial Services Limited, again, who would that be? What we do know is that Origin Energy owns 51% of the shares because they were sold to them originally. Shareholding is very widespread. Other than Origin, no institution, foreign or domestic, owns more than 5% of shares. The biggest non-Origin shareholder is the government through the Super Fund and ACC, who own 5% of all shares in Contact and 10% of the available non-Origin shares.
I thank the Minister. The Honourable Trevor Mallard, supplementary.
Further to the answer from yesterday, number one, does the document which was being referred to, extending the mixed ownership model, which uses the same term for privatisation as the government uses, talks about selling the same companies as the government plans to, lists the government's objectives, and was released by his Minister of Finance as part of Budget 2011, not represent government policy on asset sales when it says, quote, significant participation by foreign investors will be essential to achieve the government's overall objectives.
The Honourable Bill English.
Mr Speaker, the member is correct. It does not represent government policy. The government has, well, it's just advice from officials, and we often disagree with advice from officials. The government has decided that the proposition it's putting to the electorate is 51% government ownership and Kiwi mums and dads at the front of the queue. Treasury have a different view of how it should be done, and we disagree with that view.
The Honourable Trevor Mallard.
Does his government intend to prevent the on-sale of privatised SOE shares to foreigners?
The Honourable Bill English.
Mr Speaker, the government will be getting advice between now and the election about what the rules should be about a float, but the general disposition would be to trust New Zealanders. We believe New Zealanders want to. Well, if the only reason for owning these companies is because you don't trust New Zealanders to sell out New Zealand, then why don't they tell New Zealanders that the only reason they want to own these companies is because New Zealanders personally will sell out to foreigners?
Point of order. Order. The Honourable Trevor Mallard, point of order.
Mr Speaker, other than saying that he would get advice on it, sir, I invite you to ask the Minister to address the question.
Oh, no, order.
Order.
I believe the Minister did answer that question. He indicated details around the float had not yet been finalised, but his understanding his view of the matter at this stage, he shared that with the House. That was a perfectly reasonable answer to the question asked. Question number 11, Rahui Katane.
Thank you, Mr Speaker.